Here's Brody Brazil.
I'm going to title this whole video as a question, but I actually think I've used the wrong words. Here it goes. Can baseball save the starters? But in reality, the question is, will baseball save its starters? I think they're capable of this. It's not a matter of can they. I think it's more an issue of will baseball do anything to change a growing problem that they're starting pitchers right now, they just don't last in games or in seasons, and they're having a lot of arm and elbow issues attached to it. So let's get to what's established here first. Issues of longevity and durability. These are known things, like nobody's trying to hide it, nobody's also denying it, and they are still trending down across Major League Baseball. More injuries, less innings pitched. And you know that saying, they don't make them like they used to? I've said that a few times lately about this situation, but I totally want to take that back. Starting pitchers nowadays, I think, are in better shape physically, mentally. They know what they're doing out there on the mound with a purpose. It's just that they're being asked so much more velocity-wise and pitch-wise than starters of decades prior. As Dallas Braden, my colleague at NBC Sports, recently put it, maybe we are at the far edge of what the human body is capable of in terms of pitching. The arm and the elbow are only able to do so much, and maybe we're reaching that edge here across the last 10 years. I do think that human intervention, if we change the rules, if we change the way we operate here, these things can largely and likely reverse trends. They can fix issues. Most issues, I'm not going to say that pitchers won't have arm and elbow injuries if we change some of these rules, if we change our approach and tactics. That's still going to happen. That's always been happening. But I mean, come on, look at the amount of Tommy John surgeries alone, let alone shoulder and other arm issues. But the elbow, the UCL, has become a hot spot because of primary reasons, which we will address in just a second. Human intervention can fix this, but the game only changes if the rules change. I don't know that coaches are going to come together and band together and players will say, we've got to fix our game. We've got to make sure that we as pitchers protect ourselves. Nobody's going to do that. There's very few players speaking up about this. And of the ones I've heard, between Max Scherzer and I think Justin Verlander also recently had some things to say, there's no younger players talking about this. It's not that they don't care. I think it's that they don't feel comfortable. There's an issue here. We can fix it, but likely only if the rules change. What are the root causes? It doesn't even matter. If you're somebody who says its target velocities are too high, the spin rate is too exceptional and too emphasized, if there's a tighter grip that's being a problem for arm and elbow issues, if we value the strikeout too much, if pitchers are throwing too much more or too less than they should between their starts and their bullpen days. It doesn't even matter. If you believe in one or all of these things combined, and quite honestly for me, it's probably a little bit of a mixture of everything, but all of this is controllable. When I say we don't make them like they used to, pitchers can definitely go back to how things used to be. We just have to kind of force them to take it there. And by the way, the inspiration for this video and some 4 ideas here, that's what I'm about to do, is spell out 4 ideas. 4 of these ideas come from the 12 MLB rule change ideas to save the starting pitcher, suggestions from people in the game. This is by Jason Stark and Ken Rosenthal from a while back, more than a week ago, in The Athletic. I'm not going to share all 12 of their ideas. Some are a little bit extraordinary and maybe less likely and possible, but I want to share 4 that definitely caught my eye. I highly recommend you go check out that piece in The Athletic. Suggestion number 1, require every starter to pitch 6 full innings. So you're basically telling them, hey, throw as hard as you want, but you're not coming out of this game until you get 18 outs, right? So we'll do pros and cons for each one of these. The pros are, well, that's a simple rule for everybody to understand. There's no fudging it one way or another. If you start the game, you are required to get 18 outs. You can go longer than that, but you can't go any shorter than that. It obviously forces the starter to think about efficiency. I can't strike everybody out. I can't maybe necessarily nibble. I have to worry about my pitch count. I have to challenge hitters if I have to go 6 innings. It is kind of a tale of 2 games here to make the viewer wait. I mean, not the the players, any players, I mean the actual fans of the game, because they realize that the two starters are going to duel, but then eventually you're going to get into the bullpens, and it's likely not going to happen until after the 6th inning. There have to be some abnormal situations. What if somebody gets hurt? More on that in just a second. But it really does make it a 2-game situation, and you're not done watching the game until both bullpens truly get involved, most likely after the 6th inning. There's an increased importance of the starting role here, knowing that, well, if somebody's tanking, and they always tank in the 3rd inning, you got to leave them in there until they finish 6. Right? So a lot of the rules that we'll talk about here, they beef up the importance of a reliever or the bullpen in general, but this one would make the role of a starter that much more important. All right, so there's some obvious cons and maybe things that don't even make this a possibility. What if it took 180 pitches to complete 6 innings? What Players Association is going to approve that? I mean, 100 pitches right now is kind of the magic number where everybody thinks your elbow's going to break or your arm's going to fall off, which is not true. But to the point, if you're already worried about starters, right, and how long they're going to go, then saying that they absolutely have to pitch 6, I mean, I say that because some pitchers are still going to try for 100% exertion. It's almost like telling a sprinter, hey, you now have to run marathons. And the sprinter only knows one way to run. That's to sprint. Granted, it would take some time, but you understand the point here. It's going to take starters a while to tone it down so that they can actually get through 6. And I know they can. They used to when I was growing up, but it doesn't happen very often anymore. The penalty for injuries, should there be one? What would you do if a starter's like, my shoulder's barking at me, it's the 4th. I can't finish. Well, is that fair to the other team? Their starter is healthy. Their starter has to go 6. So is the game strategy changed too much here? That's another con. Probably, right? If you can't have bullpens be important, the bullpen get in the 4th inning, game strategy is pretty significantly altered there with suggestion number 1. Here's suggestion number 2. When your starter exits the game, so they can leave anytime, your DH also has to leave the game. Lose your starter, lose your DH. It's the DH double hook. Here's some pros to this one. It's an incentive-based rule that doesn't entirely sway the game result. You're taking away one hitter for each team. Now, it's usually one of the team's best hitters, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But one hitter in a lineup, it doesn't necessarily impact the game as much as other rules could. It's easily applicable in both the American and National Leagues right now that they both have DHs. It could also become a threshold type rule. Now, I said when the starter comes out, your DH has to come out too. What if we just said, hey, if the starter gets past 5, you get to keep your DH the rest of the game? It's kind of like a reward. It's like the starter has to go 6, but in this case, maybe the starter has to go 5 to keep the DH for the rest of the game. So this one makes sense, right? It's more reasonable. But there are some cons. Do you really want to take your best hitters, your designated hitters of each team, out of the lineup potentially in late game situations just because your starter couldn't go 5 or 6 or whatever, or whenever they came out? That's kind of an issue. It's also complex to explain, and this stuff matters. For those like you and I who watch a lot of baseball, we understand this pretty well, but imagine explaining this to somebody who's new to the game. Why is that hitter not in the game? Well, the starter came out. Well, it also may not actually be enough incentive based on the batting order in the DH spot. For example, what does it matter if I pitch another inning or 2 if our DH isn't due up for another inning or 2? See what I'm saying? The pitching situation for any given team and how long their starter has gone versus when their DH's next at-bat might be, it may not mean anything relevant. So what if a guy goes 6 on one side and another pitcher goes 5 on the other, but both of their DHs weren't going to get another at-bat until the 8th anyway? Right? So there's not really an advantage. It's such a microscopic, timely advantage it would have to be for this all to actually work out and make some sense. All right, suggestion number 3. You only get 3 pitchers total for the first 9 innings of every baseball game. Let that one sink in for a second. This one is not bad. Now, it puts more stress in certain areas, but it doesn't matter who your starter is, who your middle guy is, and who your closer is. So let's get to the pros. This prioritizes who can pitch and who might be used that day. Because if you only get 3 pitchers total, you kind of have to have your staff know who's going to start the game, who's next in the game, and then who would be closing the game. It makes every pitching change an event. You know, sometimes you bring in a pitcher and now they're going to face the minimum batters, just a couple, and then out of the game again. It used to be a pitcher could come in and just face one batter. Crazy, right? But this would make every pitching change an event. Oh, let's see who they're going with next. And that's already the case to a certain degree. But when you know you can't take out that pitcher or any pitcher one more time than that, like you don't have 2 more pitching changes. After you make your first, you only get 1 more change for the rest of the game. Every pitching change is an event. And I like the fact that it's through the first 9, so it allows extra inning flexibility if necessary. This is some pretty intense strategy, right? Who pitches really matters. And you don't really have the lefty-righty matchup situation because you're not going to have anybody in there go for 2 or 3 outs or 1 inning, honestly. You need pretty much everybody to share the load. And that's kind of the pro of this one. It requires everybody to share the load. Make your starters go longer and not have enough bullpen implementation. But here's the cons. And look, if you watch any Major League game these days, each team is generally using between 4 and 6 total pitchers. We're cutting this down to 3. This really does take away the cat and mouse pitching matchup games. Oh, I've got this lineup. All right, I'm going to throw this guy. And I'm going to pinch hit our guy, so then that doesn't match up. So now we're going to make a pitching change. My other con would be, are you asking too much of your bullpen suddenly? Like a lot, right? I mean, I think you'd have to have closers be 6-out closers. And you probably need more than 1 closer. Because if a pitcher pitched yesterday or the last 2 days of a series, and they're your closer and they went 6 outs both days, chances are they're not going to be ready or available for game 3. So does every team need 2 closers, like a primary and a backup? Kind of like hockey. Here's your starter, here's your backup. And would all the closers have to be more than just 1 inning pitchers if you only had 2 other pitchers go the prior 8 innings? Probably so. And short starts could be disastrous for bullpens. That's another con here. What if your starter, and you can take out your starter after 2, but then who's going to go 3 through 7, 3 through 6, and then who's going to go 7 through 9, or however it shakes out? Like that could be disastrous for other arms down the line. And then 4th and final suggestion here, no more than 6 relief pitchers per team roster. It's not how it is right now, but we're shrinking the bullpen to add more starters, and we're making you designate who's a starting arm and who's a bullpen arm, and that can't really change. Now, this is not very far from the way current Major League Baseball rules are. That's kind of a pro here. It's currently 8 relievers per team, so you're only changing it down to 6, but you're changing the whole complexion of your arms because there's still 13 total pitchers, but now instead of having fewer starters than relievers, now you have more starters than relievers. 7 starters, 6 bullpen pitchers. So you're spreading the load of starting pitching across more arms. This one definitely makes the reliever role more valuable in Major League Baseball. You only have 6 choices. Right? And you can't go to one of those other starting arms because they haven't pitched in 4 or 5 days. You have to designate who are your starters and who are your bullpen arms. And there would also be no in-game limitations. As with some of the other rules, you can't do this. You can't do that. In this case, you can do whatever you want. But the foundation of the rules starts with the roster. And so starting pitchers, you have more of them. They get more time in between outings. Again, I don't know if this directly fixes the injury situation or issue, but it definitely eases their workload and stretches them out. There are some cons to the 6 relief arms. Does a 7-man rotation really help starters? All you're doing is padding more time in between their starts. You're still asking them to go a certain duration, and now you're giving the bullpen less options to choose from to get them out of games. This would also create an instant need for a lot more starters across Major League Baseball. I go back to the marathon runner versus the sprinter analogy. So now you're telling several sprinters, I guess, that they need to be marathon runners. The other way around. And you have less options for spot starts, emergency starts. If your rotation is a 7-arm rotation, well, then what happens the day that your starter wakes up with food poisoning and you only had 6 bullpen arms? Now what do? I don't know that this one fixes the exertion problem that Major League Baseball has. So there you go. There's 4 things to think about. Some of them are better and more realistic than others. I just wanted to paint the picture of what's out there. And once again, it's the question of, can baseball save its starters? But really, will baseball do anything and try and save its starting pitchers? Because right now, like, how many starters are going to start this season and finish this season without any injury in a rotation? There are setbacks, there are surgeries, there's dead arms. Like, starting pitching is so depleted already. And we're not even to the month of June here of 2024. Baseball has to do something so that it can have star players as position players, but also star players as starting pitchers the way it used to be. Hey, you made it here to the end of the video. You know I really appreciate that. Thumbs up down below. That'll help me in this video and this channel. And by the way, if you've never seen this, any of this, or me before, that's actually a great thing. I'm glad you found me. Do me a quick favor, though. Go down there and hit that subscribe button so I can definitely see you back here next time.